Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're covering my pick for the best wizard build in Baldur's Gate 3. This is an update video to my previous video of the same name, because that video contains some information that's no longer true because of patches, and also the balancing considerations that we have to consider when we're building a wizard are different now that Honor Mode has been released, and that video of course was recorded before that since it's almost 6 months old. So I wanted to update this video and guide and bring it into the modern era so that you have the best current wizard build for planning your Honor Mode runs or of course lower difficulty runs. This I think is the best way to build a wizard or Gale in Baldur's Gate 3, and we are going to be focusing on an actual wizard build. Many of the builds online are using a single level of wizard to gain spell access on what's really a sorcerer or a cleric build, including some that I have made myself. So for those of you looking for a build that focuses on the strengths of wizard as a class, that's what we're going to be doing today. Before I begin, I did want to take a moment to say thank you so much to Douglas Fugate for the $5 donation, Dalton Jenkins for the $5, and Jacob Delaney for the $5, as well as Is This Live for becoming a channel member, and Douglas Fugate again for becoming a channel member. Thank you so much, my friends. I really do appreciate the support. It really does mean a lot. Let's also take a moment to talk about Wizard as a class, because I think that Wizard is a class whose strategic direction and role in a party is pretty widely misunderstood because of the direction that the game pushes you by sort of its default choices, and what wizards look like in other games compared to what they look like in Dungeons & Dragons. The way that Wizard is presented to you in-game, with Gale by default being an evocation wizard, a lot of the early spells that you get are damage spells, seems like Wizard is going to be a damage-oriented class, whose job is to blow up large groups of enemies using high damage spells. That's mostly not the case. While damage is something that wizards can provide, and AoE control spells are something that, and AoE damage spells are something that wizards do get access to. Wizard is primarily not a damage class. Wizard is a control class, focused on keeping the battlefield in your favor, and the way that it does that is by having the right answer to every problem at the right time. If you think of a monk as Superman, whose job is to punch through solid steel, a wizard is Batman, whose job is to be prepared for every circumstance and have the right tool for the job, no matter what comes up. You get the largest spell list in the game and access to as many spells as possible because you can always scribe spells from scrolls. So in any given situation, you're going to have the right answer. Sometimes that answer is a fireball. Sometimes there's a lot of goblins, and the best way to deal with them is to blow them up with a fireball. But the point of Wizard isn't to just have the highest burst damage. It is to be able to present the right answer to a given problem in any circumstance, no matter what comes up. So you have to think of your wizard as a box of tools more than just a hammer, because that will allow you to position yourself strategically when you're playing a wizard in order to get the most out of the class and the class features that it provides you. We're going to be building our wizard to maximize that potential as well, because versatility and power go hand in hand when you're playing a wizard. I'm using Gale as the example character here because, of course, Gale is the wizard of the party, so it just makes sense. But also, human is actually a pretty good pick for a racial option for wizards. If you're building a custom wizard and want to choose a race, what you're looking for is the light armor and shield proficiency that a few races get. Shield proficiency especially is very valuable for wizards because not only does it increase your resiliency, there's a lot of shields that are very good for spellcasters because of the magical effects that they have. And so human or half wood elf that get light armor and shield proficiency, Githyanki that gets medium armor and once per day Misty Step, or halfling, because halfling allows you to reroll ones, which is very powerful, all make excellent choices for a race for wizards. Dwergar can also give you permanent out-of-combat invisibility, which is extremely powerful for a class with such low hit points, because it means that you can start every combat in the position that you want, and will always be an excellent choice for every class. But for wizards in particular, it's very good to get these armor and shield proficiencies if you aren't getting them from multiclassing, because wizards don't get them by default, and they're incredibly powerful and useful. Next, we have to fix our ability scores. The default ability scores for wizards are actually closer to correct than a lot of the default point spreads for many characters, but there's definitely some optimizations that we can make. You always want to avoid odd numbers in your ability scores, with a couple minor exceptions, but in this case we definitely want to avoid odd numbers, and so we want to fix these ability scores so that they are as powerful as possible. To do this, we are going to get rid of all of this charisma, because we don't need that at all as a wizard, and we are going to put go down to 16 intelligence, which gives us the same bonus as 17, go up to 16 constitution, get 14 in dexterity, and then 12 points in wisdom. Wisdom saving throws are really important. They're much more important than charisma or strength saving throws, so we put our additional points into wisdom in order to maximize our wisdom saving throws so we don't get mind controlled or locked out of combat. And of course we use intelligence for everything that we're doing. Constitution is great both for hit points, which it will be a huge portion of your wizard's hit points. From your constitution, almost half of your hit points are going to come from constitution over the course of the game, if you take 16, so that's why we do that, as well as allowing you to maintain concentration on spells. When you take damage, you make a concentration save, and so having additional, which is based on your constitution, having additional constitution means that you won't fail those saves. Dexterity is really important as well, both for armor class and initiative, and so we definitely want to have that as high as possible. You can take splits that emphasize dexterity more than constitution, but I think for most players you're going to want to have the higher hit points just to give you a little bit of extra buffer. For our skill proficiencies, there's really nothing here that matters for wizards. Wizards are not a skill-focused class, and so there is almost nothing that you're going to be able to use that gives you a bonus. It seems like Arcana or History should be very good for your wizard, but those skills tend to only come up in dialogue, and you won't have the dialogue skills, the persuasion, etc., to make use of those skills, so they will typically not come up. Investigation does sometimes come up outside of dialogue options, so you can probably pick that up, and you will be able to pick up one other thing from your background or from your skill selection. You could take medicine. It does come up occasionally outside of dialogues, but for the most part, your wizard is not going to be making skill checks. Also, just in case you're wondering, there's a visual bug here because this is an old save, so Gale's human skill proficiency will be on persuasion when you build this character yourself. It's just on sleight of hand here because of the older save. For our cantrip selection, we are going to want to have at least one damage cantrip, and then a bunch of utility cantrips. Now, I recommend only taking one damage cantrip, because why would you cast a damage cantrip that isn't as good? Basically, you just want whatever does the most damage and has the most utility, and in this case, that is Ray of Frost. Ray of Frost is the best of the damage cantrips because at 60-foot range, it uses an attack roll, so it's always going to be relatively easy to land, and it has a ton of utility. Slowing enemy movement speed is very powerful because it keeps them away from your wizard, which obviously you don't want to get into contact with enemies on a squishy spellcaster, and also it can be used to freeze puddles of water on the ground. An enemy standing on an ice surface will have a chance to fall over. If they fall over on their turn, they skip the rest of their turn. They lose their turn entirely, so it's actually one of the best control spells in the entire game, putting an enemy on an ice surface. That's going to be a theme you'll see coming up repeatedly as we continue to build this character. For our other two cantrips, we're going to take Minor Illusion. You absolutely want this somewhere in your party. It's so valuable for grouping enemies up. There's no save against this effect. They'll always walk towards it, so you can group them up, you can turn them away so you can hide, you can get individual enemies to wander off on their own, so you can pick them off away from their allies. The possibilities with this spell are endless, and it's incredibly powerful. And then for our last selection, we're going to take Mage Hand. Mage Hand is very useful both for story events, so you can send it through pipes and stuff or push buttons with it, but also it can throw things, which can include bottles of water. Bottles of water set up pools of water, which get enemies wet to double lightning and cold damage, and also allow you to freeze them with Ray of Frost. So this can basically be a whole extra party member once per day with Mage Hand. For our spell selection at level 1, we are going to make sure that we have some of the most important and powerful spells in the game, but it's important to note on wizards that what spells you choose when you level up are not the only spells that you'll be limited to throughout the game. Wizards can learn any spell from any scroll that they find, and so your spell selection as you level up is mostly going to be determined by what scrolls you have found already. You just want to learn spells that you don't yet have scrolls for, and to make sure that you just have every spell in the game known as quickly as possible. With every spell in the game, you'll always have the right answer to every encounter, so it's very important to get the widest array of spell selection as you possibly can. At level 1, though, we're going to take Shield, because this is the best defensive option in the entire game. As a reaction, it can block a number of enemy attacks, especially when combined with light armor and shields. When you cast the shield spell, you'll have higher armor class than martial characters at this level. And we will take as our main combat spell Chromatic Orb, because this is a spell with 6 different modes, all of which are very good, and which will give you access to a whole bunch of different options. In particular, the Ice mode can be used to create an ice surface, which can knock enemies over and win encounters all on its own. We will then take Magic Missile, because of the reliability of Magic Missile is very important. This spell never misses, which is incredibly useful. There's no save, it never misses. There's some encounters it just wins on its own and also can be used to finish off low health enemies. Long Strider, which is free to cast. It doesn't say this in the tooltip, but it's a ritual spell, so it doesn't cost a spell slot to cast. Basically just increases your whole party's movement speed by 10 feet, which is obviously incredible. The mobility and power of that cannot be overstated. Grease, which creates a very large AoE surface on which enemies fall over, and can also be set on fire for some additional damage. And then for our last spell, there's a couple different options. You can take utility spells. I think that the best option overall is going to be Find Familiar. This is very useful for scouting, can be used to trigger sneak attacks with a rogue if you have one in the party, and so on. Later on, you'll get access to better unique familiars through story events, but it's very useful in the early game to have Find Familiar if you don't mind microing it around, which some players don't love to do. Also, just before we move on, I will mention that at first level, if you are intending to multiclass, the two most viable multiclasses are both taken at first level. 1 level of Cleric or 1 level of Sorcerer are both very good at this point, and so you can do that. I'll talk a little bit more about multiclassing in a multiclassing section, but I just wanted to mention that you would take those while making basically the same choices of everything at this level, instead of your first level of Wizard, and then you'd level 11 levels in Wizard after that. Alright, that is our level 1 build. Let's move on to Wizard level 2. At level 2 Wizard, we get to make the most important decision that we're going to make as we build our Wizard, what subclass we're going to take. Which Wizard school you take determines which of the extremely powerful subclass features you get access to, and so which selection we take is going to change the direction of our Wizard build significantly. By default, Gale is an Evocation Wizard, the damage-focused subclass, and as I previously mentioned, I don't think that that's the best strategic direction to take wizards. But if you are interested in an Evocation Wizard build, I do have one up. You can find it under the best Gale build in Baldur's Gate 3 under my lore-friendly character guides playlist. For the 8 subclasses, I think that there are really 2 that stand out far and away above the others. These are Abjuration, which is broken, although it changes significantly how you're going to play a wizard. I have a guide up for this under the Mighty Tank Wizard, and you can go find that as well. But Abjuration Wizard plays out quite differently than a default wizard build. It's more its own thing and will tend to be a tank and retaliation damage build more than a standard wizard build. For the people who are interested in going a wizard, a spellcasting focused character, I think that the best choice of subclass is going to be Divination Wizard. Divination gives you access to Portent, which is an easy ability to overlook, but is ludicrously powerful. After each long rest, you roll 2 dice and just set aside those numbers. Whatever you roll on the 20-sided die, you set aside. During the day, you can replace any die that you see rolled with those numbers. So you can guarantee that enemies fail saving throws. You can guarantee that enemy attacks miss. You can guarantee that ally attacks hit. You can guarantee that allies pass saving throws. All of those are incredibly powerful effects, and they remove a bunch of the randomness of the game. The enemy of optimization is randomness. This is something that I say pretty frequently, and that is very important to consider, especially for a character whose job it is to answer various situations, like a wizard. Being a divination wizard doubles down on the powerful things that wizards do by giving you the right answer to a problem at the right time. You will always have the solution that you need when faced with a challenge, because you will be able to guarantee that something works. I can't overstate how good it is to just have things guaranteed work, and so Divination Wizard gives you that option, which is ridiculously powerful. The one downside of Divination Wizard is that as implemented in Baldur's Gate, it will do a little pop-up every time you see a die rolled, which can get very annoying. But if you can withstand that, then it is both an extremely fun and satisfying class to play and an incredibly powerful class. So I'm going to recommend that we take Divination Wizard for our wizard build, because Portent is such an incredibly powerful feature. And then as we level up, we're going to select some more spells. Whatever we haven't found from scrolls, we will take, but it's very good to have, say, Ice Knife and Fog Cloud. Fog Cloud can be used to blind enemies without a saving throw, which is very powerful, and Ice Knife is a damaging and Ice Surface option that can be used in place of Chromatic Orb for just a little bit more damage. What matters more is our prepared spell list than our spell selection, though, and I'm going to guide you through taking spells, preparing spells at each level that I think are going to be a good default spell preparation. Ignore these extra spells. These are just ones that Gale has learned from scrolls in this save, but that will give us the spells that we are going to use as we level up. So, at level 2, a good default prepared spell list is something like Magic Missile, Chromatic Orb, Shield, Long Strider, and, let's say, Grease, because that gives you a lot of different options to overcome various encounters. With our spells prepared and our subclass selected, let's move on to level 3. Wizard level 3, we get access to second level spells, and the most important ones here are going to be Cloud of Daggers and Flaming Sphere. Flaming Sphere is a summon, which means that enemies will focus their attacks on it. It adds a little bit of damage to your encounters, but more importantly, it distracts enemies significantly. It has a decent amount of health, it can roll around the battlefield, setting enemies on fire, and enemies will spend their turns attacking it, which saves your party. Cloud of Daggers is incredibly powerful because there is no saving throw associated with it. This spell is 100% reliable, just like Magic Missile. It is also the best single target damage at level 2, because it does 4d4 damage, which translates to an average of 10 damage, and it does this both when you cast it and at the start of the entity's turn when they're standing in it. As well, it will do its damage again if you push an enemy back into it with a shove or something like that. So, Cloud of Daggers does 20 damage on average when cast, which is actually the highest single target damage from any spell with no saving throw at level 2. Only Scorching Ray does more average damage, but that's only if all 3 rays hit. So Cloud of Daggers is actually going to be better for single target damage than any other spell you have available as well, and is incredibly powerful for AoE damage. It lasts for multiple turns if you can maintain concentration on it, so you can use this to kill a lot of goblins. For prepared spells at this level, we are therefore going to be taking Cloud of Daggers, and we're going to swap out one of these spells for Flaming Sphere, because we want to have access to both. The spell that we're going to swap out at this point is going to be Grease, because while Grease is very powerful, we do duplicate that effect a little bit with the Ice Surface from Chromatic Orb, and Flaming Sphere is just very nice to have access to at this stage of the game. With our spells prepared and selected, we're going to go on to level 4, where we get access to our first feat. For our feat, we are just going to go ahead and take Improved Intelligence, although if you are playing on Honor Mode, you can definitely consider taking Alert at this level, and I might even recommend that for an Honor Mode playthrough. Initiative is just so important that I love getting alert at level 4 for honor mode. On lower difficulty levels, I think it's less important that you take alert early, and so we're just going to go ahead and grab some intelligence to make sure that we're landing our skills and our spells are going off. At this level, we won't have a ton of items that increase our save DCs, so the additional intelligence will make a pretty big difference in terms of how frequently our spells actually land. At later levels, you can get away with not having capped intelligence, but at lower levels, it's very important to increase your save DCs, so we're just going to pick up an ability score improvement. For our spell selection at this level, it doesn't really matter what we select as we level up. That's going to be based on what we find in scrolls, but some others that can be important to have. Knock can be useful for out-of-combat utility. Web is very good in some circumstances because Enwebbed is such a powerful condition, but mostly we want our prepared spells to reflect the necessities of our adventuring day, and so we're going to pick up Misty Step. Misty Step is so good because it's a bonus action, a repositioning tool, so if you ever find yourself out of position, you can get away from enemies without triggering attacks of opportunity. You can place yourself on high ground that's just out of reach of melee enemies, and so Misty Step is just incredibly valuable. Every character should strive to get access to Misty Step, and you should always have it prepared on every character. There's some items that help you with this on spellcasting characters, so it's very good to be able to grab this. For our cantrip selection at this level, we're going to go ahead and take another utility cantrip. We're getting into the part of the game where we really want a light source, so I would recommend taking light at this point if you don't have it somewhere else in your party. Another option here is Blade Ward, which you don't want to use as a default action in combat, but can be useful to buy yourself a turn if you find yourself really out of position. But in general, your wizard is not getting a lot of value from Blade Ward just because it doubles your effective hit points, but the base that it's doubling is very low since you're a wizard. So I wouldn't recommend Blade Ward on this the same way I would on some other characters that care more about maintaining temporary hit points or can get more value out of it. But a wizard is a great character to have light, for example, because it gives you access to quite a lot of additional utility. If you already have light on another character, you can pick up Bone Chill. Bone Chill gives you the ability to stop enemy healing and gives undead disadvantage. You will start to face a lot of undead around this point in the game, and giving undead disadvantage on an attack roll can be a pretty valuable crowd control effect on undead enemies. So Bone Chill is very valuable both for enemies that heal and for undead. In particular, undead that heal, like vampires, for example, Bone Chill can be very good against, and you should try to have this somewhere in your party as well for the utility that it provides. If you don't have light, though, I would definitely recommend grabbing light. At Wizard level 5, we get access to 3rd level spells. And 3rd level spells are where spellcasters really take off. These are some of the most powerful spells in the game, and most of your combat encounters are going to start with you casting one of the very powerful 3rd level concentration spells, and then, depending on what the encounter is, you'll select which one is most appropriate for that encounter, and then using lower level spells to just pick off the weakened enemies. 3rd level spells are game-winning all by themselves, and so selecting them and making sure that we have the right ones prepared and are able to choose the correct ones for a given encounter is extremely powerful, and that's what Wizard excels at, because you get to just know all of them. For our spell selection at this level, therefore, there is one spell that we definitely have to take because you cannot get this spell from a scroll, and that is Counterspell. There are no scrolls of Counterspell available in Baldur's Gate 3, so you have to learn this by leveling up. And Counterspell is the other most powerful defensive option in the game, in addition to Shield. Between those two spells, you will have excellent things to do when it's not your turn, and that's one of the great things about Divination Wizard, is that you can change enemy dice rolls using portents, you can counter their spells, and you can shield their attacks. So enemies will be very frustrated trying to play against a Divination Wizard because you have the answers to everything that they're trying to do. For our second spell at this level, it's going to depend on what we found from what we found from scrolls, but a great option is haste. Haste is very useful to buff up your allies. As well, you are going to want to have access to Glyph of Warding as a default combat spell. It's basically a big chromatic orb, just gives you 6 options, but it can also knock enemies out. It can put them to sleep. And Sleet Storm is an enormous AoE disable, as well as some spells that Gale here has learned from scrolls, like Hypnotic Pattern. And so for our default combat spells prepared at this level, I'm going to get rid of Flaming Sphere because we're likely to be concentrating on a 3rd level spell at this level. We're going to prepare Counterspell because we always want that. We're going to prepare Hypnotic Pattern, and we're going to prepare Haste. This gives us access to a big AoE disable as well as a party buff, which can be very useful in some encounters where you don't have where enemies are resistant to your disables or where you don't have the damage. We also have a great damage option from Cloud of Daggers and a bunch of defensive options, as well as 2 excellent default combat spells in Chromatic Orb and Magic Missile. This spell list is going to be one of the best possible for getting you through the game at this point, I think. At character level 6, we get the Divination Wizard minigame. Expert Divination gives you, whenever you take a short rest, you get the Prophecies. Prophecies are sort of mini-games that you can fulfill in order to gain extra portent dice. Portent dice are so powerful that it's worth going out of your way in combat, and it's also a really fun little minigame to try to fulfill the conditions of the prophecy to get these portent dice. The prophecies are things like do a certain kind of elemental damage, cast a certain school of magic, and so on. That's one reason that Chromatic Orb is so good for this character, because it fulfills a lot of the prophecies all on its own, which are just do some elemental damage. And so that will give your character access to a bunch of additional portent dice throughout the day. This is a very fun feature and definitely worth paying attention to in combat. For our spell selection, we're going to make sure we have the other powerful AoE disable spells that we want from leveling up as a wizard, although again, this is going to depend on what you've found scrolls for, but we're going to grab Sleet Storm and Glyph of Warding. And for our prepared spells at this level, I'm going to recommend taking Sleet Storm, because this can be used against enemies to knock them over. It creates an enormous ice surface, which causes enemies to fall over and be unable to move towards you, as well as losing their turns. And your encounters are going to consist of selecting between the powerful level 3 disable spells at this level, and then finishing off enemies with cantrips and lower level spell slots. At wizard level 7, we get access to 4th level spells, which are not as game-breaking in general as 3rd level spells, but still for wizards have a couple extremely powerful options. One of these is the day-long summon Conjure Minor Elemental. Minor Elemental summoning can be very powerful because you can summon an ally which lasts the entire day. The Ice Mephit can be used to create a bunch of ice surfaces, and that is an extremely valuable option. And for the cost of a 4th level spell slot, you get something that lasts the entire day, which is awesome. It's great to have these abilities that you can cast before combat so that you can power up your party over the course of an entire adventuring day. I encourage you to experiment with which elementals fit best in your party, because it's going to depend a little bit on what you're doing. But in general, it's always a good rule of thumb that the ice versions of everything are the best in Baldur's Gate, because you can double their damage with the water effect, with the wet effect, and they create ice surfaces, which can be used to knock over enemies. Similarly, we're going to take other utility spells at this level. Things like Banishment can be very useful because it targets it doesn't say this on the tooltip, but it targets the enemy's charisma save. Many enemies have very low charisma saves, so this could be an almost unbeatable saving throw effect for your enemies. You can also do damage and create an ice surface with Ice Storm, or pick up Confusion. Those are some of the most powerful effects, and there's some abuses you can do with greater invisibility with a stealth character, so if you're doing that, you'll want that. For prepared spells at this level, we are going to add in Conjure Minor Elemental. and we're going to add in Wall of Fire. I'm going to go ahead and replace Cloud of Daggers with Wall of Fire here, because Wall of Fire just solves some encounters on its own, and a lot of the encounters where Cloud of Daggers is good, Wall of Fire would be good as well. We still have good things to do with our lower level spells. If you find that you are missing a damage spell at this point, or not using Haste, you could replace Haste with Cloud of Daggers or Scorching Ray. Scorching Ray doesn't take concentration, so that's pretty nice as well. But if you're using Haste on your party, obviously you want to take that. Just pick up whatever spells here we haven't learned from scrolls, and all of those are going to add significantly to your arsenal. At Wizard level 8, we get another feat, and the feat that I'm going to suggest is if you are on Honor Mode, you definitely want to take Alert, especially if you're more confident with your positioning by this point in the game, which you should be. Initiative is so good because going first means that you're landing your powerful concentration disables before the enemies can act, so you're costing them turns. Also worth thinking about is that in any encounter that you win, which in a Baldur's Gate game is going to be all of them if you win the game, you will take the last turn. So if you take the first turn, that's just fewer turns your enemies are taking over the course of the playthrough. Initiative is so powerful for that reason, because it increases the ratio of your actions to your opponent's actions, which is what Wizard's all about, stopping your opponents from taking relevant actions. So going first is really good. If you are finding, if you're not on Honor Mode, and so can get away with not having such high initiative, and you're finding that you're losing concentration on spells often, you can take Warcaster, because this will make it much easier for you to succeed on concentration checks, and then you will not lose concentration on spells as well. But for an Honor Mode build, I definitely recommend taking Alert. For our spell selection at this level, again, we're just filling out spells that we haven't found from scrolls at this point, so we're just going to go ahead and grab whatever we need to fill out our collection, because you're just playing Pokemon with a wizard, you just got to catch them all. And then we're going to go on to level 9 and 5th level spells. At 5th level spells, you get access to yet another one of the most powerful spells in the game, and that is Conjure Elemental. This has both a 5th and 6th level version, and can summon a Water Elemental or a Water Myrmidon, are usually the best by default because of the ice and water synergies that are just so powerful in Baldur's Gate 3, but all 8 of the summons, whether you use the level 5 version or the level 6 version of this spell, are incredibly powerful and incredibly strong. I highly encourage you to experiment with which of these fits best in your party, cast the different ones and get used to their abilities, but if you're just looking for a default one, the Water Elemental from level 5 and the Water Myrmidon from level 6 are probably the best default ones for most parties. For our other spell selection, it doesn't really matter what we take, because we typically will not prepare and cast level 5 spells other than Conjure Elemental. You're going to be using your 5th level spell slots for upcasted versions of lower level spells, but some good options that do come up sometimes in combats are Hold Monster, Telekinesis to throw enemies over ledges, or Wall of Stone can actually be used to divide combats. This is a spell that people tend to dislike, but I think is actually kind of cool for wizards, because you can split the encounter in half and only have to deal with half the enemies at once. In general, though, the most likely to come up is Hold Monster. Cloud Kill is also good if you're looking just for damage, but Conjure Elemental is the real winner from this spell level, so we're going to pick that up. We're going to grab Conjure Elemental, and we're going to take whatever of the level 3 spells, the most powerful level 3 spells we haven't taken at this point. So Glyph of Warding as a default combat spell if you're looking for a non-concentration option, or Fear if you're looking for a concentration option. Wizard level 10, we get access to Third Eye Dark Vision and Third Eye See Invisibility, which honestly are kind of annoying to me as abilities because they are useless. Dark Vision and See Invisibility is stuff that you'll have access to long before this and aren't very good in the first place. And for some reason, they require you to reactivate them every long rest. I don't, this is a tangent, but I have no idea why they decided you have to recast these every long rest instead of just getting them passively. It's kind of annoying to me. But anyways, you can safely ignore these abilities. They don't matter at all. For our cantrip selection here, we are going to go ahead and take True Strike to annoy nerds in the YouTube comments, and then for our spell selection at this level, we are going to pick up the other powerful spells that we want to have access to at this level, things that we don't know from scrolls and that we might be able to use in various circumstances. For our default prepared spell list, we're just going to go ahead and add in the last of the powerful level 3 spells to give us the option of the perfect spell for every encounter. Fear can be used against, is the most devastating of these, but requires melee-ish range because it casts in a cone, and enemies can't be immune to fear. But between Glyph of Warding, Sleet Storm, Fear, and Hypnotic Pattern, you'll always have the right thing to be concentrating on in any given encounter. Each of these is good in different circumstances, and as you play through the game, you'll learn the circumstances in which these are very powerful, and so that will give you the correct option for every encounter. Also, bear in mind that you can always change your spells at any time outside of combat. So if you are coming up on an encounter with an enemy with a low charisma save, you can swap in Banishment. If you're coming up on an encounter that you want to stay invisible for, you can swap in Greater Invisibility, and so on. The game is very generous with letting you do that, and you can always change your prepared spells outside of combat, so you should take advantage of that often in order to have the right spells for the circumstance. At character level 11, we get access to 6th level spells, the capstone abilities of spellcasters. 6th level spells are game-breakingly powerful. Under most circumstances, when you can't refresh spell slots, although there are ways to do that with items, you only get one of these per adventuring day, so you want to make it count. In fact, the best 6th level spell for most wizards is actually not a 6th level spell at all, but the 6th level version of Conjure Elemental. If you only get one of these, then summoning a Water Myrmidon will do more than most 6th level spells throughout the day, and is a great default option for 6th level spells. However, there are also some 6th level spells that are incredibly powerful and really good to have access to. I'm going to highly recommend that you get Globe of Invulnerability. This just wins encounters on its own. You create an area which for 3 turns, everything inside it is completely immune to damage. In the late game, a lot of boss fights just come down to a damage race between you and the enemy, and this just wins those boss fights instantly. Next up, there's a couple of spells here that are very useful. Chain Lightning can be used to just win encounters. It just basically kills for mid-level enemies, which is very valuable for removing adds from boss encounters. But my favorite, and a spell that I think is often overlooked because it was recently buffed in patch 6, it was terrible up until patch 6, is actually Wall of Ice. This, as a combat spell, is really, really good. Not only can it be used to divide combat similarly to Wall of Stone, when you cast it, enemies take 10d6 damage if they're in the area, so 10d6 of damage, and then it doubles that damage if they are wet, of course, so that will be one of the highest damage AoE nukes in the game. It also creates an ice surface, which knocks enemies over, and then has a secret double damage mode. If you cast this spell and then break concentration on it, which you can do manually, I'll show you that in a second, then enemies that are in the area will take the ice cloud damage as well. So you can do quadruple damage with this spell if you cast it, cancel it, and have wet enemies. They will take 40d6 of damage, which is an absurd amount of damage, and is going to one-shot just about every enemy in the game. Any that aren't one-shot are going to be standing on an ice surface and potentially knocked over, and will be very vulnerable to anything else. So Wall of Ice is actually an excellent combat spell, and one that is worth keeping for an encounter where you really just need to kill a bunch of enemies. Though, again, your spell selection is going to be based on what scrolls you've found. Finally, at character level 12, we get access to another feat, and the feat that we're going to take is just to max out our intelligence, so make sure that our save DCs are high enough to knock enemies out with perfect reliability, although, of course, we also get our Divination Wizard dice to make that easier. And then for our spell selection, I will say there's one spell that is not available from a scroll at this level. There's no scroll of Create Undead, so if you want Create Undead, you have to select it when leveling up, rather than learning it from a scroll. Fortunately, it's not like a great spell, so you don't need to select it, but if, like me, you really feel like you haven't played the game properly, if you haven't collected every single wizard spell, then this is one that you do have to level up manually. And then other notable wizard spells at this level are Chain Lightning. Disintegrate's good for some encounters. Sunbeam can be pretty nice if you have a source of haste elsewhere in your party. A hasted character with Sunbeam can cast this beam twice per turn, and so can do quite a lot of damage there. There's some encounters it's very good against, but mostly you're going to be using Wall of Ice, Chain Lightning, and Conjure Elemental, as well as Globe of Invulnerability for certain boss encounters. Otto's Irresistible Dance is also very good for knocking enemies out. There is no saving throw with this spell on the first turn, so it just trades your turn and your spell for an enemy's turn. Against some bosses, this is incredibly strong as well, and so making sure that you get access to this spell in your party is very good. This is slightly less important for Divination Wizards than for other wizards, because for Divination Wizards you can often force an enemy to fail a saving throw with a Portent die anyways, but having no saving throw is really, really good, and that's why we're a Divination Wizard in the first place, so Autos is also a very good spell to learn. For prepared spells at this level, we're going to pick up Globe of Invulnerability and Wall of Ice, and this gives us access to our best options for combat spells, which will solve most encounters at this point, although, again, depending on what you've learned from scrolls, you're going to want to swap those in and out. Alright, that is our 12 levels of Divination Wizard. I'll talk briefly about strategy, multiclassing, and items, and then that will give you the best wizard build in Baldur's Gate 3. For combat strategy with a Divination Wizard, what you're mostly doing in every combat is selecting which of the concentration spells you have access to is the best for that combat. You're going to focus usually on your third level spells, whether that be Hypnotic Pattern to knock out a large group of enemies, notice the giant AoE of this spell, Sleet Storm to knock out a large group of ground-based enemies, again, the giant AoE is very important here. Enemies who you can easily hit multiples of with Fear, you want to do that because it's a better crowd control effect than the other crowd control effects, but slightly harder to land. Haste is good if you feel like you want to focus on an ally for that combat because you don't have the right damage type or something along those lines. Enemies who are clustered or have to pass through a narrow point can be defeated by Wall of Fire. So your options are very good for what spell you are going to focus on, and in most combats, that's the major decision that you're going to make, is which of these powerful concentration spells you're going to be using in order to win that encounter. One quick thing that you do have to do with Divination Wizard, though, is to go to your spellbook and go to the reactions tab of your spellbook. Make sure that your portent dice are set to ask when used, otherwise the game will just completely waste these for you, as well as shield and counter spell, because the game will use those on its own, which will cost you spell slots, and you definitely don't want that. You want the game to give you the option to use these or not, so make sure that all of your reactions are set to do use them and ask you whether or not to use them. That's the most important thing for playing this character. For items for this character, there are really two things that a wizard needs. One is spell DC items, and the other is initiative. Those are the only things that you really care about, and so you're just looking for items that increase your spell save DC, like the Fistbreaker Helm, and items that increase your initiative, like the Fistbreaker Helm. So some things to keep in mind are, so basically just any item that increases your save DC, and your initiative is one that's really good. Some shields are very good for this, and there's a lot of robes that are very powerful. Also important is items that can refresh your spell slots, because that can give you access to multiple level 6 spells per day, so the Spellcrux Amulet with spell slot restoration can be used to do that as well. Also, of course, you have your wizard abilities with Arcane Recovery, and this can be used to give you access to additional spell slots of levels 1 through 5, so you can use a level 5 spell slot and then gain back Arcane Recovery charges to get an additional level 5 spell. Very important to keep that in mind, because it lets wizards cast more high-level spells than any other spellcaster in a given adventuring day. A couple other specific items that are good that are just made for wizards is in the late game you'll get access to the Robe of the Weave, and which is just a very powerful robe, and you'll get access to Mark a Heshkir, which gives you a bunch of additional spell casts per day, as well as letting you refresh your level 6 spell slots, or rather than refreshing, it lets your next cast not cost a slot, which is basically the same, and it increases your spell save DC, so it's just the perfect item for you and will be best in slot on into the end game. For multi-classing with this character, there's really two main options if you want to stay primarily a wizard, and that is to take either a level of sorcerer or a level of cleric at first level. A level of sorcerer gives you a bunch more cantrips, and you're going to want to take only utility cantrips from this because you're still going to take the same stat spread. You won't have high enough charisma to use your sorcerer cantrips. But what you get from a level of sorcerer at first level is constitution save proficiency, which means that you'll maintain concentration on spells much more easily. This is especially good if you are looking for... if you are going to use Ethel's Hair to still hit 20 intelligence, and so a level of sorcerer in that case at first level is going to be really good, and you can take some of your utility spells like Shield and Magic Missile at level 1 and get access to that as well. If you're doing that, the correct subclass to take is Storm Sorcery, because Tempestuous Magic is incredibly strong. Anytime you cast a spell, you get a bonus action to fly, and that basically solves all your positioning problems for the rest of the game, and will make your character much safer and more resilient. The other option is to take a level of Cleric, because Cleric gives you not only the powerful utility spells from Cleric, you get access to Guidance, which is one of the best spells in the game, you get access to Resistance, and you get access to, let's say, Light, and then you can spend your wizard spell slots on more aggressive spells. You also get heavy armor and shield proficiency from your subclass selection, because you can take Life Domain Cleric, and that will increase your healing as well from the Cure Wounds access that you'll get from a spell slot. So you take Cleric, you get access to Healing Word as a spell, as a prepared spell, and that gives you a bonus action to heal an ally, adds a whole other dimension of utility to your character. It lets you concentrate on Bless and so on, and I think Life Domain is the best Cleric to select at level 1 if you're going for a Cleric dip. Cleric Dip gives you more versatility, as well as making your character more resilient. Sorcerer Dip gives you better concentration saves and better mobility. Both come at the cost of 1 feat, but are excellent options if you're looking to multi-class this character. I would recommend, of the two, I think the Sorcerer Dip is a little bit stronger, so if you are looking to just have the most powerful option, then I would recommend an initial level of Sorcerer for your character. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this look at the Divination Wizard, the best wizard build in Baldur's Gate 3. And of course, if you have, feel free to leave a comment, like the video, and you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 build guides and other strategy game content. Cheers, folks. I'll catch you next time.